The election of Hillary Clinton would lead, in my opinion, to the almost total destruction of our country as we know it. She would be the most dishonest and the most corrupt person ever elected to high office. Americans have had it with the years and decades of Clinton corruption. It's corruption. Crooked Hillary wants to end forever the American independence that our founders gave us. Our great founders are spinning in their graves. Our founders are spinning in their graves.
Donald Trump, earlier today, back on the campaign trail at a huge, massive rally in Florida. Also tonight, WikiLeaks released an email from Clinton campaign chairman John Podesta. Look at this subject line: needy Latinos and one easy call. Wow. Joining us now is reaction from the Trump Organization, Donald Trump's son, Eric Trump. How are you?
Hey,
good to
Sean.
see you.
How are you?
I saw you had tweeted that out earlier today, so obviously you're paying attention to this. Imagine your father talked about needy Latinos.
When does it end? You know, first it's deplorables, then it's irredeemables. It was super predators before then. Today it was rednecks. Now we're talking about Christians, evangelicals were getting killed earlier today by these emails. Now it's needy Latinos. It is, you know, and they talk about us being the party of bigotry and the party of hate. And it's not until Julian Assange comes along and obviously releases these emails via WikiLeaks.
The real Democrat. Remember the original release on the DNC? What did it show? It showed racism, sexism, misogyny, anti-Semitic language in there. And that's the very arguments they make against Republicans every 4 years. That's them.
Look what else it showed. It showed corruption in Haiti. It showed that Donna Brazil was giving Hillary questions, you know, ahead of time for these debates. I mean,
conspiring against Bernie.
It truly shows the true level of corruption in our government. I mean, and in the Democratic Party. I mean, it's actually very, very scary. And this is serious stuff. And it's actually a real shame that most of the mainstream media isn't paying more attention to it. You do. But most of the mainstream media isn't paying attention to this because this undermines democracy. It undermines the way of our life.
Eric, I have been brutalized by the mainstream media.
I know.
I'm a commentator.
I know.
I say I'm a conservative. I'm open. I'm supporting your dad for president. I'll proudly pull the lever for him. But NBC, CNBC, Univision, CNN, MSNBC fed questions to Hillary. You know, the New York Times, Boston Globe, Washington Post. They're colluding with the campaign. And they're going to criticize me, and I'm honest?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got corruption in the Republican establishment, the Democratic establishment, the media establishment. Your dad's up against a lot of establishment.
And by the way, this is corruption of the worst form. And this is corruption that cost this country trillions of dollars. This is corruption that's cost this country lives. This is corruption that compromises national security. I mean, this is real stuff. I mean, this is real stuff. This is actions. This isn't words. And people have to be held accountable. This is the commander-in-chief of the free world. How do you
hold them accountable but to elect your dad?
Well, you know, when you look at the interesting little complicated webs, right, where you have, you know, the sons and daughters of major, you know, the CEOs of these major news networks, and they're working at the Clinton Foundation, you have all these little intricate webs. It's difficult, and they sow these ties for this purpose. They do it for their own political gain.
And here's what's happened in the meantime, the stats I give out on the economy.
Sure.
Okay, 13 million more Americans on food stamps, 8 million more in poverty, the lowest labor participation rate since the 70s, 95 million Americans out of the labor force, worst recovery since the 40s, lowest home ownership rate in 51 years, 1 in 5 American families, not one person in that family working, and we've doubled the debt.
Sure. And they don't want to report that. And they don't want to report that.
I say it every night.
How about the scariest thing? The fact that median incomes in this country haven't gone up in 15 years. Median incomes haven't gone up. And actually, Sean, they've gone down because if you think about it, all of our expenses are higher, right? Our taxes are higher. Our utilities are higher. Health care, Obamacare is a disaster.
Obamacare is up $4,100 per family since he's been president.
So if you have median incomes, if people haven't gotten a raise in this nation in 15 years and all of your expenses are higher, it's no wonder why people are working 2 and 3 jobs just to try and get back.
You know that there was a stat that came out the other day, 1 in 7 Americans don't have $1,000 in savings. They're 2 paychecks away from being one of the 13 million Americans on food stamps.
Yeah, and we have $20 trillion worth of national debt, which is going up exponentially. We've got $1.4 trillion in student debt. I mean, it's really incredible.
How does the country absorb all of this in 27 days?
No, listen, I think we've started an amazing movement. My father started an amazing movement. I mean, I've been in every single state. I just got back from Colorado yesterday. I had an amazing couple of days there. I was in Maine. I was in New Hampshire. I was in everywhere. There's a movement out there, Sean. People get it. People want...
You can see the crowds.
People want
There's
this country...
enthusiasm.
People want this country back. They're sick of corrupt politicians, and that's what we have in Washington, D.C. You see these closed-door deals. Look at this Russian uranium deal, where Hillary approves 20% of the United States uranium going to Russia. I mean, this is the material used to make nuclear weapons. And then the Clinton Foundation gets $145 million for it. I mean, talk about compromising national security. It's scary stuff.
When you think of Hillary saying these two things, you need a public and private position, and she doesn't like the everyday Americans.
It's amazing.
That, to me, says everything you would need to never get elected.
Well, then she also says, listen, I'll be the hardest person in the world on Wall Street. But then she goes to Wall Street and says, you'd be the perfect people to solve Wall Street's problems.
But they paid her $225,000 for that speech.
Amazing. And by the way, when you're an employee of the government, when you're Secretary of State, shouldn't you be working on behalf of the people of this country as opposed to giving paid speeches? You know, if you're giving hour-long paid speeches, you need to prepare, you need to travel, you need to do everything else. I mean, don't you think that's a distraction toward your job?
How about 55% of the people that got to see her as Secretary of State were donors to the foundation?
I know.
That's called pay to play.
Yeah.
And then the Haiti Foundation you talked about, they literally separated a list for donors so they could capitalize on the rebuilding of Haiti.
Listen, I ask a question every single day. They came out of the White House and they claimed, Bill and Hillary, they claimed they were quote-unquote dead broke. Now they're worth $250 million. And the question I always ask was, what product did they sell? How did they go from zero to $250 million? What product did they sell? And,
nothing.
And by the way, when you ask that question, I think a lot of people understand what was really happening there, and it's very, very sad.
Eric, good to see you, buddy.
Hey, great
Thank
to see
you.
you, Sean.
27 days. You ready?
We'll get it. We're going to get it.